Welcome into episode 92 of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Tacek.
You work hard to keep your information safe, to keep your privacy locked down, to protect your kids' information. Wouldn't it be neat if the companies that handle your information did that too? Oh, I'm not saying none of them do, but just in the last few weeks, we've heard surprising and alarming stories of companies trickling out your data like sands through the hourglass. 5 such stories on today's checklist, including the not-so-secure tale of Securus, mobile providers selling your location, one company giving away your location, the unsafe story of TeenSafe, and finally Comcast gives you reason to cut all the cords. Probably wouldn't help, but you kind of want to. Let's start, though, with the not-so-secure tale of Securus.
So, did you know that there are companies that buy phone location data from the cellular carriers, then turn around and resell that location data to law enforcement agencies? That's more than a little bit creepy, and it's not even the worst part of the story. It turns out that one of the companies that brokers location data didn't actually pay very much attention to their own security and ended up getting hacked. On May 16th, Motherboard reported that someone contacted them with proof that they hacked Securus. That proof consisted of usernames and passwords that were very poorly secured for thousands of law enforcement customers. The location data that Securus obtains from major telecom carriers is typically used by marketers, which is also creepy in its own way when you think about it. But Securus specifically repackages it for use by law enforcement to track phone users. Securus touts its product as being able to track mobile devices even when GPS is turned off. It does so by providing its customers with call origination and call termination geolocation data. That's kind of a mouthful, but it basically lets law enforcement agencies know where your phone was physically located when you placed a call and when you ended a call. The hacker provided Motherboard with internal documents and data from Securus, which included a spreadsheet of over 2,800 usernames, email addresses, phone numbers, hashed passwords, and security questions dating all the way back to 2011. Now, the passwords were not in plain text, but they were only hashed with the notoriously broken MD5 hashing algorithm, which is pretty much just as bad as plain text in practice.
That is pretty bad. Although for this one, too, it's, well, to me anyway, what struck me is it's not just the information that was accessible, but, you know, who that information covers. I found a piece from Business Insider about this, referencing the Motherboard piece you mentioned. Motherboard described the contents of this breach as including, as you said, poorly secured passwords, for thousands of Securus law enforcement customers, as well as usernames, email addresses, phone numbers, and other personal information. And Motherboard reports that it was able to verify that the information was accurate. The data breach also reportedly includes that of Securus staff members, and according to Motherboard, the roles of the users listed in the spreadsheet that the hacker supplied include jail administrator and deputy warden, indicating that much or even most of the hacked data came from prison staff. So, personal information of law enforcement and personal information of the people who are supposed to be guarding this information, all of which could potentially be used to turn what are ostensibly good guys into, at the very least, compromised individuals, if not downright bad guys. Yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, this is like the plot of a Harrison Ford movie, except you'll never get Harrison Ford for this movie. Plus, he's too old these days. This is like...
Whoa.
Whoa, all right. We can talk about that another time. Point being, though, this is such an amazingly horrible backdoor key. It's like, oh, there are gangsters in jail. There are, security guards who don't realize that now their personal information is out there. In so many ways, just leave alone the data privacy part of it. This just feels like, this feels ridiculously terrible.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. And even aside from the law enforcement agencies and those customers, it appears that Securus didn't actually need a hacker in order to leak information. There's apparently a Securus user manual available online, basically demoing their product, and it includes screenshots of the product. And normally those screenshots would be dummy information. It wouldn't be real. Nope, they just posted real screenshots of personally identifying information for a real person. And Motherboard verified that in some online databases and other reporting that, yes, this woman who's in the screenshot is a real cell phone user from somewhere.
Now, was that like one of the executives? They were demoing it to somebody internally there, or was this just like somebody's ex? Like, take a look.
It didn't say. It didn't say. It sounded like it wasn't somebody in the company, though, at least from the reports I read. But yeah, I mean, it's just the whole situation. It's making me shake my head, facepalm. It's bad.
See, I heard it was the guy from LifeLock. I'm kidding. Sorry, I love that though. He's going to be a recurring character on this show. I have a feeling. So this one is really annoying. Actually, all of these are annoying. And when I say annoying, I mean anything from annoying to infuriating. U.S. cell carriers are selling access to real-time phone location data. You'd think there'd be a law.
Yeah, there's a law called the Electronic Communication Privacy Act, which restricts telecom companies from disclosing data to the government. But wait, didn't we just say that the law enforcement agencies were buying location data? So how is that legit? How is that legal? Well, there's a loophole. You see, the law enforcement agencies weren't buying the location data directly from the cell phone carriers. Instead, they were buying it through a middleman, in this case, Securus. The Electronic Communications Privacy Act only limits direct disclosure of user information by a telecom provider to the government. It doesn't restrict a telecom provider from disclosing the same information to another company who can then in turn disclose it to the government.
Yeah, this is one of those stories that's more than annoying. I mean, it's so laws are put in place to protect us, but they go just one step, right? So then when someone introduces money into the equation, they drop the spirit of the law for the letter of the law, saying, we didn't sell it to the government, we just sold it to that guy, and what he does with it is up to him. And you can argue that it's a revenue stream for Cellcos, except I'm already a revenue stream for Cellcos. I mean, this isn't even like the whole Facebook thing where they say if it doesn't cost you anything, you're not the customer, you're the product. I'm the customer and the product in this case. And so are you. And so are you. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Exactly.
So it's not just me. Okay, well, as long as it's not just me.
No, there should totally be some like good faith type things built into it, and this would be a example of not good faith, just going like, no, we read the law,
right,
and we followed the law,
right. I didn't sell it to him, I sold it to his best friend.
The law didn't say anything about this.
Right. Exactly.
Now, it's not just government agencies buying your cell phone location data, with some companies making legitimate use of the data and others not so much. For example, location data can be used by companies to help track shipments and deliveries, or by banks looking to combat fraud. If you make a purchase with your credit card in your hometown and your card is also used in a transaction 100 miles away just a few minutes later, your bank can cross-reference your cell phone location records to weigh the risk of fraud. On the shadier side of location data use, some companies will use it to send a text message to a person when they visit a rival store. Creepy doesn't begin to describe this situation, though.
Man, that's great. So, as incensed as I am by location data being sold, in at least one case, it was also just available for free.
Yeah. LocationSmart, one of those companies that buys and sells cell phone user location data, happened to have a bug on their website, and that bug allowed anyone real-time access to precise location data for mobile devices without the need of a password or any other form of authorization. It appears that LocationSmart had a demo available on their website, so prospective customers could try out the service before committing to a purchase. The demo functioned by allowing someone to check the location of their own device, simply by providing their name, email address, and cell phone number. LocationSmart would then send a text message to that mobile number asking for permission to ping the nearest cell phone tower to their mobile device. Now, a security researcher at Carnegie Mellon University found a bug in the LocationSmart demo that allowed anyone with a basic understanding of how websites work in the background to obtain the location data of any mobile device, not just their own. This bug didn't require any sort of authentication, and it didn't require consent on the part of the owner of the mobile device being tracked. So, how long was this buggy demo leaking location data for? It appears to have been online since at least January 2017.
Do you guys operate on the assumption that if you find something like this, somebody has used it? Because I want to say, like, okay, it's a demo on this relatively unknown, service, although people obviously looking for this kind of information are going to be looking for vulnerabilities like this. I mean, can we assume that this was used against people, or do you say it's possible it was just proof of concept?
It's one of those things. I mean, if somebody knew about it and they were using it or abusing it, obviously they're going to keep quiet about it, and thus it's not patched. You can't really say, yeah, maybe somebody was using it, but I don't really think there's real evidence one way or the other. Depending on how LocationSmart had their back end set up, they could maybe have logs or find some sort of information there, but obviously they're not going to make that information public. So they're the only ones who know that, and anybody who possibly abused the service before it hit the news.
Right. And I mean, not to be too wonky about the whole thing, but the chance of us ever finding out is pretty slim, because if you sued them for access to that information, you'd have to provide some kind of indication that you think you were actually a victim.
Exactly.
Right. And so finding who that might be is worse than a needle in a haystack. So I was going to say I love irony in names, but really I don't love this one. I sound angry in this episode. I think it could be because I am. Let's talk about the unsafe story of TeenSafe.
Back in episode 24, that was our episode on iPhones and kids, we talked about apps that allow parents to track their kids. Well, it turns out that one of those companies providing that type of service wasn't too good at keeping track of their own security. The app in question is called TeenSafe, and it's built as an app that allows parents to view their children's text messages, look at their location, monitor who they're calling, when calls are made, snoop on browsing history, and see what apps are installed on a device. Now, this app doesn't require an iOS device to be jailbroken. Instead, it relies on grabbing all of that data from iCloud backups. In order to access those iCloud backups, TeenSafe would need access to the iCloud account, which means they would need the Apple ID and password. And since we're reporting the story on the checklist, it's probably obvious that something went wrong. Because of course it did. A security researcher named Robert Wiggins found two leaky TeenSafe servers. One of the servers appeared to only contain test data, but the other one had real records. At least 10,000 of them. These leaky servers were accessible without any sort of password or authentication, and contained customer data including the parent's email address, the child's Apple ID email address, which also serves as the Apple ID username, the child's device name, unique identifier, and finally, the plain text password for the child's Apple ID account. And since the service required that two-factor authentication be turned off, that's all the data someone would need to silently break into those Apple ID accounts. Now, there's a little bit of a silver lining. None of the records appeared to contain content data. There were no photos or messages, and they didn't contain any location data. But back in episode 24 of the checklist, we also discussed how it was a really, really, really bad idea to provide a third party with your Apple ID and password, or in this case, with your teen's Apple ID and password. This story is a perfect example of why it's a really bad idea.
I don't know if that really is a silver lining, though, because you had the Apple ID and password, so even though the photos or messages weren't on this server, you still had the Apple ID and password, and then you could retrieve everything from the backups yourself anyway, right?
That's a very good point. I guess the silver lining is that it wasn't as easy for the bad guys to get the data. Kind of. Slightly less silver lining.
An extra step. Yeah, now turn on two-factor authentication and change your passwords.
Yeah, I think I'm somewhere between the two of you on this, actually, because you're right. On the one hand, all that information was accessible. On the other hand, it wasn't all sitting on a server for somebody to just, take out. I mean, you'd have to do, I don't know if this is good or bad, but a bad guy would have to do a little bit more work to find out. Like if they're having to download the iCloud backup of photos to see if there's an incriminating photo or just to get their jollies, they have to do a bit more work as opposed to, with so much information sitting there, it would not have been surprising at all to hear, oh, and they also had all the pictures that your kids had taken, whether those were, pictures of their day at the park or their night at some party you didn't even know about.
Yeah, that's kind of the point when it comes to the iCloud passwords. If you give it to a third party, if you share it with a third party for one of these services or for anything, it's handing over everything to that third party. Yeah, they're saying, oh, in return, we're going to help you, track your kid and look at this data. And all it really is just logging into the iCloud account and getting that data. It's not smart because that third party then has access to all that stuff. And you're also relying on them to keep your username and password secure, which in this case, obviously wasn't the case.
Right. Any number of things could happen from that company being sold to someone else to that company running shoddy security of its own. And then it's Katie bar the door. We got one more story that we want to hit today. The Comcast website. This is great. This is another one of those I am both the product and I'm like a product that was left on the doorstep, it seems. Comcast's website was leaking Xfinity customer data.
Yeah, it's not just cell phone users that are being hit with that multitude of leaks. Comcast Xfinity users got to join in the fun. Comcast has a website where users could activate their Xfinity routers as part of the process of setting up their home internet and cable service subscription. And it turns out that the website had a bug, of course, which could be abused to leak sensitive customer information, of course. All that was needed was a customer account ID and a customer house or apartment number. Now, that web form required the full address, but it appears that all it was actually checking was the number part of the address, so that's all you needed. And there apparently wasn't anything that would have stopped a determined attacker from just brute forcing that address number if they didn't already know it. So, as a result of the bug, the following information leaked. The full address where the router was located. So again, if the attacker didn't know the full address beforehand, they would now. The name of the Wi-Fi network. Now, with many ISPs providing semi-randomized Wi-Fi network names these days, that can actually be a pretty valuable piece of information for a potential attacker. And the most important, the password for that Wi-Fi network in plain text. So, what could the bad guys do with that? Well, first, the bug still worked even after the customer had activated their Xfinity router, and there wasn't any way for them to opt out of the service. So an attacker could go in anytime later on and easily look up someone's Wi-Fi network name and password. And then they could use that information to log on to the Wi-Fi network, assuming they're within physical range. Again, they had the address, so they drive over there. And then they could snoop on any unencrypted network traffic. The tool apparently also included the capability to rename the Wi-Fi network and change the password, which would result in temporarily locking out legitimate users from the Wi-Fi network. Now, as bad as the bug was, Comcast did take quick action once the story hit the news, and they took the buggy website tool down.
Can we assess the levels of freak out that we should be having? All these stories are bad in their own ways, but I want to see if I'm catching how bad. Securus, really looks like this one was used in bad ways, but it was used by certain people against certain people. Is that accurate, or is it bigger than I'm thinking?
That's pretty accurate for that one.
Okay. TeenSafe, ironic, in trying to keep kids safe, parents may have made them more vulnerable. Is there any indication that something bad happened here? Or is this, again, sort of like I was asking earlier, is this like something bad could have happened, or do we actually know that something bad happened as a result?
I think this is one of those theoretical ones again. We don't really know, but there's no information pointing that it was abused. It looks like it was just out there, but not necessarily. But again, since the two-factor authentication had to be off, nobody would know if it was used.
Right. Right. And I'm guessing sort of the same thing with the Comcast Xfinity. I mean, I'm looking for a silver lining here, like you mentioned earlier, but the problem...
There is one for Comcast, actually.
Okay.
There are a couple ones, actually. First of all, it looks like the tool and the password and username you could get, that information couldn't be used to actually log into the router and change any settings. So the bad guys couldn't actually like reprogram the router to go through their own rogue DNS servers or perform any man-in-the-middle attacks. It was limited to essentially... I mean, obviously, getting someone's address and the Wi-Fi name and password isn't good, but the most the bad guy could do with that, aside from locking you out of your own network until you rebooted the router, would be the same as anybody who brought their device to your house and logged onto your Wi-Fi network. They could sit there and watch unencrypted traffic on the network. Thankfully, most of the important stuff these days is encrypted. Your email's encrypted, hopefully. Bank stuff's encrypted. A lot of chat stuff's encrypted. Anything with an HTTPS in the URL bar is encrypted. So it limits the amount of information that they could have obtained. The fact that they couldn't actually use the information to change settings on the router was the really big silver lining there, because they could have done a lot worse if they had been able to get into the router itself and make changes.
See, the problem I have is I personally don't want to seem alarmist on all this stuff, but if we just play the numbers, the chance that all of these vulnerabilities were found first by a good guy who then went and told everybody immediately, even if most of them are found first by a good guy who immediately, tried to work with the companies to make sure that their stuff was secure, if only 25% of them were found by a bad guy first, there are just so many of them at this point that it's not encouraging.
You're not overwhelmed, are you?
I'm at the very least whelmed. I would say that. I don't know if I want to go for overwhelmed because, there's always the potential for more. As always, we are just scratching the surface on these stories. If you want to dig deeper on any or all of them, links to them are available in one place, SecureMac.com/checklist. There you'll find notes for today's show. You'll find the notes we were talking about for episode 24, and heck, all the other episodes we've done so far. SecureMac.com/checklist. If you have a question you'd like to ask or a topic you'd like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. And we'll talk to you next week.